Hello and welcome to this month's Rights in Russia English interview. It is November 6th, 2025, and we're catching up with Konstantin Sonin, a Russian-born economist, now the John Dewey Distinguished Service Professor at the Harris School, the University of Chicago, where he has been a full professor since 2015. Dr. Sonin has written in leading political science and economics journals, published Lessons on Economics, a book on economics for a wide audience, contributed to major international and Russian media outlets, and frequently comments on social media. In 2023, Dr. Sonin was placed on Russia's federal wanted list, a criminal case based on commentary he published in 2022 about the Bucha massacre and the siege of Mariupol. In the spring and summer of this year, he spent several months teaching economics in Kyiv. Welcome to Rights in Russia, Konstantin. Thanks for fitting us into your busy schedule.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you.
I'd like to start by asking you about your recent time in Kyiv. What was your teaching role there, and what impressions did you bring back with you to Chicago after your time in Ukraine?
Okay, I was teaching there. I visited Kiev 3 times since the beginning of the war and spent eventually like 4 months there. I was teaching a quarter of game theory and microeconomics. So these are regular classes because there are quite a lot of people from around the world who want to visit the Kiev School of Economics and teach in Kiev. But I think most help comes when people teach regular classes. So I taught game theory and
Mhm.
microeconomics. It was a partial relief for people, for my colleagues there who stay and teach throughout these years of war. So I also thought that as a person who is not experiencing like every day's bombing, I could be a
Mhm.
source of optimism and good mood for this while I'm there.
Mhm.
Okay, I would say that Kiev is very much busy and active and happy European town in the midst of a war. So you see both like flourishing restaurant areas. You see students because kids are not drafted to the army. Young men younger than 25 are not drafted, so there are more students in Kiev. It's one of the student capital, university capitals of Europe. So it's like a young city, but at night you see drones, you see bombs. Every night someone dies. This May and June, these were terrible months in terms of attacks. And I discovered for myself that it's not that easy to teach game theory, which I taught for 25 years in different places. It's difficult to teach it after a sleepless night. And I could only imagine how it's for students who, after a sleepless night, a night spent either in a bomb shelter or hearing the drones and missiles, how they could learn, but they are learning. I mean, they're great students, among other things.
In their approach to their studies, I mean, how do you compare them to the students that you teach in Chicago?
Oh, I think, yeah, I mean, my students in Chicago, they're as ambitious and as smart as my students in Kiev. Perhaps they sleep safer at night. So there is some difference. I mean, there are in the Kiev School of Economics, there are undergrads who came from the territories that now occupied by Russians. They escaped Russian assault in 2022. They came from cities like Kharkiv or Dnipro, which were shelled like daily for these 3 years. So there are students who have terrible experience, like no young person should have this kind of experience. Still, in my class, they were students. They were trying to learn, and they were successfully learning pretty advanced stuff.
Mhm. A question related to your academic work. In 2011, you published in Russian your book Lessons on Economics. Could you remind us of the audience for the book and perhaps speak to whether there have been developments since 2011 that you would include in your book if writing or revising it today? And if so, maybe provide a couple of examples.
Okay, this is a popular book. I targeted a wide audience, so not academics, but all kind of high school kids and students who are interested in what economists do. It's lessons. It's not like first lessons. It basically what modern economists do told for a wide audience. So I took up some advanced research, what was advanced 15 years ago, and tried to describe this in layman terms.
Mhm.
I'm a political economist, so for an economics book, there was a lot of pages, a lot of words spent on like comparing economic growth onto democracies and development, the importance of free markets, the
Mhm.
importance of competition, the importance, like the, I don't know, harm of government over-regulation, and
Mhm.
I mean, I would just repeat these things, only that back 15 years ago, I was warning about the dangers of dictatorship,
Mhm.
dangers of expropriating private property. Okay, in Russia, a lot of this thing has happened since. So nowadays, if I would be preparing a new edition, there was a second edition in 2019, and uh, I actually had a contract before the war about a new edition. So now I'm thinking where I should prepare a fourth edition of this. Um, I would, I mean, a lot of things that were risks then, they're no longer risks. This is what happened. This is what you see with the Russian industry, with the Russian private sector, with the Russian entrepreneurship. It's these risks, they already happened. Russia lost a lot of entrepreneurs, it lost a lot of private business, it lost basically all kind of innovative industries except for the industry of war production. But in all other industries, what happened is what I was warning in my popular book.
So you don't need a revision. Is it available in Russia, your book?
Okay, it's now the copyright has expired, so I put it on my website. You could download the PDF. It's an official edition. I mean, it's totally legal and it's totally free.
Excellent, excellent. There's been a lot of discussion about whether the economic sanctions against Russia are working. And 3 years ago, in a foreign affairs piece, you suggested that the long-term cost of the Ukraine war would be staggering for the Russian economy. And so I wonder to what extent that prediction has been borne out and how you see the long-term economic effects of the Ukraine invasion more generally.
Okay, I think that the economic damage to Russia is like enormous. So, like in macroeconomic terms,
Hmm.
these are maybe 10 or 20% of GDP lost over several decades. So it's
Hmm.
already lost because of the war, and more is going to be lost because Russia has withdrawn from the international markets. This is a huge loss. Russia is under sanctions. This is another loss. Russia lost 1 million of people, among them the most talented, the most entrepreneurial, the most active people. This is another loss. So these losses are, in a sense, staggering. But unfortunately, we learn it, and I think it's not for the first time that that economic costs is not what stops war. Like it's like the cost of Hitler's adventures, economic costs of Hitler's adventures for Germany were enormous, and they were sort of predictable. In fact, a lot of people predicted that. And still, this did not stop World War II. The same thing now, as predicted, a lot of harm is done. Like Russian people already live far worse, far meaning like, I don't know, 10% worse. Because
Hmm.
like when we economists say a catastrophe, we think about like 10% loss of a personal income of something like this. So it's not like 90%. So remember the say during the huge economic crisis in 2008, 2009, the United States GDP has fallen slightly less than 3%. And this is considered one of the largest crises in decades. So in Russia, the nominal GDP has not basically changed since the onset of the war, but it's basically a lot of additional production in the military sector and a huge loss of production and consumption in the civilian sector. So Russian people now live like this 10, 15% worse than they lived before the war. For an economist, this is staggering, this is huge, this is
Hmm.
something which is should not be happening. But when we talk about major wars, this is not something that stops major wars.
Hmm. And the people for whom there's been a 10% decline, is that recognized?
Oh, okay, no, but you wouldn't recognize. Like if we just cut your income by 10%, I mean income, savings, whatever you have, make your house worse than 10%, you would probably not change your behavior. You will adjust on the margin or something like this. If people lose like 20% or maybe like 40% of their income, they will be looking for a new job. They will be selling their assets. They will be changing their behavior in major way. But 10%, it's a loss, but it's what people accommodate.
They can,
Like
they can.
like think of this. For example, one very visible thing that happened to Russian people is that basically there is much less new cars sold over the last 3 years. So
Mhm.
hundreds of thousands of Russians did not buy the cars that they were buying back before the war. So what it means that you are driving the old car for another year, for 2 years. This is a loss, but this is not something that kills you. This is not something that forces you to do some drastic action. So
For
that
sure.
for economists, this was a problem since the beginning of the war, to explain that things things are bad, but bad does not mean that the end is near. It's
Mhm. Right. Um, it seems that despite occasional comments to the opposite, President Trump has basically withdrawn U.S. support from Ukraine. In your view, is this an accurate picture?
No, I think it's sort of not very accurate. I mean, we are living with Donald Trump as a major political figure for 10 years, and we're still struggling to parse what is happening around him because he's certainly a master of informational control, meaning that he says something and this immediately draws all the attention. So, like,
Mhm.
if you remove the Trumpian noise, like in the last 9 months, then basically his policy supporting Ukraine is very much continuation of the Biden administration policy in the last 2 years.
Mhm.
So it's still support. It's still support at the insufficient level, but it's not fair to say that support stopped. President Trump was able to shift some of the burden of price tag to the European countries, but this is not the main thing. The main thing is technology. The main thing is advanced weapons. The main thing is intelligence sharing, and this is all done with all kind of hiccups and noise, but it's basically the same thing. So it's fair to say that Donald Trump did not turn the tide the way different sides hoped for. But he did it. It's not fair to say that he withdrawn support of Ukraine.
Mhm. And in Ukraine, is it seen that the U.S. support continues despite? the
In my
things that Trump
in my
says?
experience, in Kyiv, I mean, in Kyiv, I was not doing anthropology or sociology, so I talked to people, but I did not
That's all
interview
right.
people and not making
Mhm.
inference, like much academic inference. But my impression is that Ukrainians do not think that it's Donald Trump who decides their fate. They think that it's themselves, that it's the Ukrainian army, soldiers on the front line, the government in Kiev. This is who basically keeps their country out of the Russian control. So they thankful when Trump gives weapon, then happy when he says something nasty. But this is not like what they're thinking every day.
Uh-huh. So, under Putin, Russia seems to be moving into China's sphere of influence. Do you see this as a temporary development, or is it a sign of a long-term realignment in the global economy that might signal the decline of the West?
I think that like there is no I don't know that it's not like an intellectual project of Putin to get into the China to make Russia a China's client. So this is not like an ideological decision. I think for Putin, the war, waging war, occupying Ukraine is the paramount thing. So whatever works. If
Mhm.
China is ready to give some weapons in exchange for cheap gas and oil, be it. So he basically try to use China. As a result, Russia is far more dependent on China than before, but I do not think that this is a policy. I could easily imagine that a new government will be like blaming Putin for becoming China's colony and steering a totally different course.
Uh-huh. Okay. When we look back at the 1990s and what many call shock therapy of those years in Russia that was supported by the West, do you think that this eased the way for an authoritarian leader like Putin? Could maybe a different model of economic reform have reduced the risk of authoritarian rule that followed?
I think that the depth of the economic crisis contributed to the rise of the authoritarian government. But I think that there were more important reasons, and one more important reason is that Russian people have never had a final reckoning with the Soviet past. So I think that Russian people has never realized how much how much their worldview is shaped by the Soviet worldview, and I think this contributed more to the rise of authoritarianism and to the failure of the Russian democratic project. Because in
Mhm.
Eastern Europe, there were countries that did far more shock therapy than Russia, and
Okay.
still they somehow um, were able to establish very, I don't know, very stable democracies and enjoy years of economic prosperity under democracy, like Poland, to some extent, Czech Republic and Slovakia, Baltic countries. Romania is obviously an economic wonder. Bulgaria is an economic wonder. Basically, everyone except Hungary, every country in Eastern Europe except Hungary are success stories,
Mhm.
stories of either economic miracle or very solid economic development.
Right. I think I remember that in one public debate, the economist Sergei Guriev pinpointed the loans for shares deal of the Yeltsin years as one moment in particular where Russian reforms took a wrong turn. Others, such as the writers Boris Akunin, have emphasized the First Chechen War for example. So, what did Guriev mean by loans for shares, and what is your view of that discussion of a wrong turn?
Okay,
Was there such a
loans for
thing?
shares was a specific privatization scheme. It was not a very big deal economically, so less than 10% of the Russian
Okay.
privatized industry was privatized during this specific auction, but it came in a very traumatic moment and was done in a way that this has become like a symbol of what was wrong with privatization. A lot of things, a lot of things were right with privatization. A lot of things were immediately vindicated, like privatization of small businesses. A lot of things were eventually vindicated, like privatization most of industry. But the thing is that people do not remember this like that. They remember traumatic events. So a lot of people think of very bad years and things that were like most visible things of these years. So I'm not sure that loans for shares have cost something, but it's certainly something which is a symbol of what was wrong
Uh-huh.
with the transition to the market. The
Mhm.
first Chechen war, it's the policy of Boris Yeltsin, who was the democratically elected president of Russia. It was like there's no question that the policy was wrong. It was the first Chechen war. Launching it was a mistake. The problem is that it doesn't seem that there was better courses. It's like a thing when we know that something what happened was bad, but were the alternatives? So for me, like the first Chechen war is extremely different, and many events of the 90s extremely different from the 2022 war that Putin started against Ukraine, because this was exactly the war of choice. There was nothing compelling. The
Mhm.
alternative to this was peace. The alternative to this was not a war by different means. Back in 1994, the alternative to the First Chechen War was the ongoing civil war in Chechnya. So Yeltsin somehow thought that he could do a drastic move and stop the war, but it was an actual war with hundreds of thousands of refugees and a huge conflict. And again, no question, it was a mistake and a hugely traumatic event, but it's something like a bad thing in an extremely difficult situation.
Right. Um, in general, when we think of Russia as a test case, is there a connection, as many have thought, between market economics and improved human rights, or is that all something of a misunderstanding?
No, I think that we learned a lot since 30 years ago. So I
Mhm.
think 30 years ago there was a general assumption that democracy and market economy, these are two things that reinforce each other. And this is probably true. And I think like since then, economists got Nobel Prizes for arguing like this. But I think that this connection is not that strong as many believed. That Russia demonstrated Russia is still a market economy. Still, a lot of things are not under government control, and it's basically, in terms of government, is
Mhm.
almost as totalitarian as the totalitarian regimes of the past. They're not that repressive. I mean, people are not killed in bulk like under Stalin or under Hitler, but it's as totalitarian by in other respects, and still it's a market economy. So I think that we learned that market economy, it's sort of support for democracy, but it's not something that could um, save democracy by itself. It's it's an amenity rather than the determining cause.
Got it. Which brings me to my final question, and that's going to be about current developments in the US. Soon after taking power, we know President Putin in 2000 began to impose limits on the media and to ensure friendly oligarchs held key roles in the economy. To what extent do you see similarities between what happened in Russia after 2000 and current developments in US politics? And what does that tell us about the relationship between politics and economics and the threats to human rights in modern society? And this kind of follows on to your comment from the last question.
Okay, I see connection, but I see when we say that something is similar, we also need to look at the scale of things,
Mhm,
right? So I think that Donald Trump tries to silence media and tries to establish control over the information space. But I also think that this basically every politician wants to do this. President Nixon was as adamant in trying to silence media.
mhm,
Presidents like champions of liberty and freedom, like Jack Kennedy, they would cancel subscriptions. They would try to influence coverage. The same thing, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His administration would reach out to sponsors of, I don't know, extremist content, trying to censor crazy thing. And President Woodrow Wilson just put his critics in jail, just simply in jail, using the wartime powers.
mhm,
So the thing is that the leader wants to silence media. This is not surprising for a political economist. This is what they do. It's the strength of the society, strength of the civil society, the strength of institutions, of laws, of
mhm,
people who organize elections. This is basically what defines the freedom of speech and freedom of media. If it were for the leaders of the countries, we will always live in the Orwellian world, right? They would, like every leader, would would probably ban all the media, but they are not led to. So this is what I see in the United States. I see the leader who wants to silence media, and I see the people, a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people who do not want their media silenced. We just seen in midterm elections in New Jersey and Virginia that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump a year ago, they're not voted him because they want him to do his revenge tour or to do media to introduce media censorship or send troops to American cities. They voted for different reasons, and now they're voting against him because they want to have a check on him. So I think there is some similarity, but the strong response of the American society, the strength of the American institutions, is what was missed in Russia 20 years ago.
mhm. Great note to end on, strength of civil society and institutions. And so that's very hopeful. Uh,
Sure.
we all get our posters ready for the next day. Uh, Many thanks, Konstantin Sonin, for a rich discussion today. We're grateful for your time, and we wish you all the best in the academic year ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you.